Hello everyone. Thank you all for taking some time out of your busy schedules to attend this webinar. I'm Brandon Telg from UFHR Training and Organizational Development, and I will be moderating this conversation today. Please note, for those of you joining, that the conversation is being recorded and might be released in some form or fashion at some point. We do not have a release schedule for it at this time, though. Quick little recap of why we're here today, and then we'll jump right into this conversation because we've got some amazing panelists and I don't want to waste anybody's time. But after launching our Neurodiversity in the Workplace course last year, we have received one question in our feedback more than any other for that course, and that is, how do we continue this conversation? We aim to continue the conversation through this webinar series, and you can see the other session titles and dates in the screen share currently. And this is the first of 3 that we have scheduled for this year related to different topics on neurodiversity. You can learn more and register for the others at the link I'm about to put into the chat. All right, here we go, everyone. There we go. There's the link, and you can register for the other sessions there. Now, oh man, now Zoom, when I stopped sharing, all my windows went all goofy. Okay, so we're gonna just go ahead and jump right into it. Today's panel is called Demystifying Accommodations, and is really about discussing what type of assistance you can ask for, how to access accommodations here at UF, and dispelling myths around seeking support specifically here at the university. This topic was inspired by a great deal of feedback that we've gotten from that course that I mentioned already. And we've got some amazing panelists for you today. They are Russ Froman from the UF ADA Compliance Office, and everybody should see these people on their screen as they are spotlit currently. So Russ Froman. We have Jenna Gonzalez, the director of the UF Disability Resource Center, more commonly referred to as the DRC. And Anne Marie Orlando. She's a faculty member in the Department of Psychiatry, the director for the UF Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, commonly called CARD, and the principal investigator for the Florida and Virgin Islands Deafblind Collaborative. Now, I am going to ask the questions that I have prepared, and any one of our panelists, feel free to unmute and answer. For those of you listening, if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to throw them in the chat. They're going to be seen only by me. I will do my best to filter through what's coming in, but I will admit I'm going to be focused on what our panelists are saying, so I may or may not see those questions until the end. If we have time for a Q&A, that will be the best time to ask questions. And I've already gotten a question that I can quickly answer. Are you supposed to be seeing my screen share anymore? And the answer is no, because all that was a little advertisement for the other sessions coming in. And we don't need that anymore. All right, now let's get into it. Now, obviously, the range of neurodiversity related accommodations are extremely broad because there are so many conditions and needs that are inside of that category. Broadly speaking, what do accommodations look like in the neurodiversity space from your experience here at UF? What can someone ask for? In other words, what is it that we're even talking about when we're talking about accommodations in this space?
Brandon, just for clarification, would you like the perspective of accommodations from an employee perspective seeking an accommodation, or a student seeking accommodation, or both?
Thank you for asking that question. The purview of training and organizational development is from the workplace. And that being said, we do have a representative from the DRC here. And the reason for that is that while the conversation that we're really focusing on does circle around what an employee can ask for, many employees at UF work with students, and so need to be, and our students themselves. So it's worth having that voice here as well. But the primary audience for the questions I'm asking are employees at UF.
Well, in that context, we do, as you said, have a broad range of accommodations, extremely broad, and ever broadening that we provide for our employees with a neurodivergent disability. And the things that typically we can do for them range from things like extended time, note-taking, more clear direction from coworkers or supervisors, more quiet rooms, rooms without a lot of distractions, lower lighting, enhanced technology availability, noise canceling headphones are also fairly common. I mean, it's just a plethora and wide range. And what we would ask is to just engage in the process with us. And we will work with anyone for any reason and guide them along the way and interactively navigate their situation, both with them and with their department, so that we can come to a nice place where we can remove any barriers that may be presented through their disability.
Thank you, Jenna. Oh, sorry, I saw Jenna unmute first.
It's okay. Anne-Marie, if you want to go first, you can. Okay. Yeah, I was just going to piggyback off of Russ. And Brandon, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because yes, the workplace accommodations and all of that, but as you said, there's so many folks that interact with students with disabilities, especially on this call. And we also think about our graduate students who have assistantships and things of that nature that are directly tied to a course, but they're also being paid, right? So that's where Russ and I really have to get creative in our roles, because it's employee, it's student, it's kind of a balancing act. I think that accommodations in general, I think I really want everybody to kind of know that our belief system here at UF is really those barriers, right? Like, what are those barriers that you experiencing in the moment, you know? So it's kind of have that interactive conversation. Is there a disability present? And then really diving deep into it, because the person with the disability is that primary documentation, right? Like, they are the living source. And so it's really powerful for them to come and have that conversation with the office that's appropriate, to then get deep down into that, that really good information where it's, this is what's happening and this is what I'm thinking. And then that's where, depending on the office that they're working with, we can really have that conversation of, okay, let's see what is going to fit that. And I think that's what I love about disability, is that it's just so gray. We can make things work in so many different facets that it's really phenomenal. Sometimes when I think of the situations that Russ and I get all the time, and we're like scratching our heads, like, how are we going to make this work? And then when it comes down to it, when you stop and you listen and you talk to the person with the disability, and then you have the documentation, there really is a way for us all to get every single thing that we need accomplished. Because in so many ways, if it is a course or if it is a workplace, everybody has to be held to the same standards, right? There's objectives, there's standards. Those are really important and valuable. And that an accommodation can only go so far, right? Like, accommodation can't equal success, and accommodation can't equal that you are really good at your job, right? But it can help amplify and get you to that point, which I know is what, I mean, I love about working in disability for that part. Accommodations are all over the spectrum, like Russ said, right? I mean, we see it all with students in the classroom and in academics. I see it as a director with my employees, right? Like sometimes the simplest of workplace accommodations that to me are, yes, we can do this absolutely, are sometimes not always thought about. But the person with the disability is like, yeah, but if I could just come at 8:15 instead of 8, I could catch this bus instead, and I would get here. And then if we could just, oh, if that solves the problem, then let's do it, right? And I think that's the wonderful part of the interactive conversation. And I know Russ will get into this, but like what his office does and how they do it is so wonderful because it's the person, it's then, and then working with the office. And we do the same thing with students, right? We work with the students, we get the information, then we work with the faculty and the academics to make sure that everything just kind of works and meshes.
Thanks, Jenna. Anne Marie?
Thank you. Yeah, I would just add to what Russ and Jenna had to say that, the type of accommodations that are often offered, across settings are really based on the individual and based on those conversations that we have to really get at what are any barriers to them being as successful as they can be in that context, and how can we bridge that gap. And the only thing I would add to sort of the list of accommodations that often occur in this neurodiversity realm is regarding visual supports, right? So that is an evidence-based practice in autism. And in our office, we work with people across the age range who have autism and related disabilities. And so in terms of visual supports, often in the workplace, it looks like, having that written direction about what they're supposed to do, having a task analysis of the processes that they're supposed to utilize in that space, as sort of the visual supports. And all of us use those, some types of visual supports, right, in terms of our calendar and getting pinged, when the next meeting is, and all of that. And those are sort of universal accommodations that I think we all rely on.
Thank you. Ironically, as you said, we get pings. I got a Teams ping notification, which y'all couldn't see because I wasn't sharing. I never thought about that as a visual accommodation, but certainly now that you've said it, that's it makes sense. I have a quick question that I think can be answered from someone on the call. Can Russ provide an example of what additional time could mean in relation to work?
Sure. Well, time to get tasks accomplished, and there might be an expectation in the department for something to be finished by a certain time period, but there are sometimes needs to have that extended and or adjusted, like Jenna mentioned so accurately. We are always open to navigating options that might help a person do their job better. And those options might include coming in at different times than other folks come in or leave, and or off hours, evenings might be better for people, weekends might be better. There's just a plethora of possibilities due to a plethora of needs. And so the interactive process is actually, it's fun and engaging, but it never ends. We will always have the option to look at what is working and what isn't working and adjust accordingly. So it's not a one size fits all, but it's also not a process that ends ever. Our relationship begins when they come through our virtual door, and then we work with them interactively until they're no longer here at the university. So it's a lot of fun, a lot of success, but it takes everyone engaged in the interactive process for it to work.
Thanks, Russ. So one of the questions that gets asked in the course that I teach, that I think this would be the best group of people to answer, is that in the ADA, the language around accessibilities is that it needs to be reasonable. And that's somewhat ill-defined, like that's kind of an ill-defined word. How do we define what reasonable is here at UF, either sort of if there's a legal definition or if there's a sort of working definition that we use here?
It's a great question, often misunderstood. And I understand why. So the reasonability standard is applied to the essential job functions that the person has associated with their role. And it's different for everyone, right? So it wouldn't be reasonable for a heart surgeon to work remotely. And that's the easiest way to look at it. It needs to fit into the expectations of the essential job function of the person. And so it is an interactive process that it also engages the department and most specifically the supervisor, so that they can help guide that that lens and that analysis for what will work based on the person's essential job function. What is never revealed is the actual disability itself in engaging in that conversation. So that is always kept confidentially. It's not what is relevant. What is relevant is how to remove the barriers, like Jenna mentioned, and that's what the goal is. But what is reasonable is, with the accommodation, is the essential job function able to be accomplished?
Yeah, I'm gonna, Brandon, we could have a whole webinar on the ADA and the problems I have with it. I mean, it's great and it's wonderful and it has paved the way in so many facets, but there's so much work that needs to be done with it in all realms, right? But yes, the vagueness in so much of the language, right? And it really does sometimes put us in a very difficult position, and where sometimes we're having to have those uncomfortable conversations with folks because of how the words and how it interferes or goes against, right? Like we cannot, like Russ said, it cannot go against the essential functions, right? Like it's the same thing with the academic side as it is the workplace. We still have a work to do, a job to do, class assignments to do, all of these features. But it's really that reasonability, because if you ask the person, everything's reasonable, right? And anything's doable. And so that is where that really in-depth conversation does have to come into play. And that is where everybody does have to come in together, right? Like, because it can't just be one-sided. It really has to be this understanding. And then, like Russ said, you have to have the disability has to stay out of it, right? And so you have to talk in these generalities and really go back and forth. And I think for a lot of what we do, the examples like Russ shared, that's what we have to, like, sometimes we have to give these examples that are just like, this can work here, this cannot work here. And then we go from there. I think reasonable, I think it also with the ADA, the whole regarded as having a disability is also something that comes into question a lot, because it clearly gives a very broad definition of what a disability is. And they do that on purpose, right? I mean, it's very much meant to be the disability professional is the one that sits with the knowledge and has that understanding. But then the person who is living with and regarded as having a disability is the person who is the primary documentation. And so I think it comes into reasonability, it comes into regarded as having a disability. There's so many things that can come into question with ADA. And I think what's really nice is that here at UF, like we have these standards, we work with general counsel, we all work very well together to know that we're all representing disability in the way that we are doing the best for all parts of the parties, as best as possible.
Thank you.
Add,
Russ, yes.
Sorry. I think it's really important to note what we fight against in this process. A lot of times are misunderstandings, or sometimes you might even say urban myths around these issues. And what we really try to do is educate through the interactive process against some of these misunderstandings. One of the most common misunderstandings is that there is somehow a fairness factor involved in applying accommodations and providing accommodations for a person with a disability. And we oftentimes have supervisors who are worried that the rest of the department will view this accommodation as an unfair advantage given to one employee, as opposed, not everybody gets to work 3 days a week remotely. Why would this person get to do that? That kind of mentality. So what we're constantly trying to do is educate that it's not a fairness factor, it's a leveling of a playing field so that everyone has equal access and equal ability to navigate and do their essential job functions in the same way. So that's something that we're regularly pushing against and trying to overcome, but also trying to educate along the way so that we aren't having to do that constantly, and we're able to just have positive, productive conversations with supervisors rather than them worried about everybody else and how they're going to view an accommodation.
Thanks. Yeah. The next question is here at UF. This is I think where the rubber really meets the road here. How does one access accommodations, right? What are the proper channels? Is it always necessary to go down a quote unquote proper channel, right? Can you have these conversations with your supervisor or team? What does the scale look like here, and how does one go about doing it?
It's a great question. It has been a shifting landscape, over the years. There were well-intentioned and still are well-intentioned people that just go ahead and provide accommodations to their employees as conversations happen because they want to get the work done and they want to do right by their employee, and they mean well. And so when oftentimes in the past more than now, thankfully, when an employee says, "Hey, I've got this thing and I need some help with it," many times the supervisor is like, "I can do that. We can adjust that," and then they do it, and often we don't even know of it when that happens. What we would ask is not to do that. The reason is we need to document what we are navigating. We want to make sure that all things that can be done for an employee are done. Many times employees don't even know what can be done. And there's also a lot of fear around retaliation and job security in these issues. And we want to push back on that and let them know that documenting helps strengthen the fact that they needed help. They're federally mandated to receive the help, and we're here to provide that help. But we are also going to make sure that no one is retaliated against as well in that process. And so we want folks to come to us. So it's at ada.ufl.edu, or they can pick up the phone and call. We want to engage and then navigate. And the only way we can do that is if they reach out. And that reach out can be from anyone, Brandon. It can be from a supervisor or a caring HR liaison or a coworker or a spouse. Anyone at all to begin the conversation and then engage with the employee to alleviate any fears and also to get and acquire all information we can so that we can help as best we can.
Brandon, if I could just feedback, Russ, I want to speak from a standpoint of, being a director and many of my staff going through this process, and how wonderful it was for me to be on that side and to experience it and to go through the process with Russ's office and then with my employees, and how really easily it helped with the conversations. And it wasn't just, oh, Jenna's going to be accommodating because she runs a disability office, so I don't have to worry as a staff member. But then once they got in there, yes, of course, I'm going to work with you and we're going to work on workplace accommodations, but let's go through the process, because there is this very clear documented process for it. And as easy as it is for me to pick up a standing desk, right? It is just so much more powerful if we go through this process, and then we, like Russ said, we can document that here at UF. It's really powerful. We have thousands upon thousands of employees, And we are doing these wonderful accommodations out of the kindness of our hearts and because we want, you know, office culture and a culture of care, and we want to do these things. But if we're not documenting it, then like Russ said, then, you know, we don't have a lot to represent the employee side of workplace accommodations. And I think there's something really powerful about putting it in the hands of the employee too, and kind of having them navigate through that space. And many of my employees have done that, and it's been phenomenal. And it's been really wonderful to just have that back and forth conversation. Sometimes I don't even have to get involved. It's just their supervisor and the employee, and they're having the conversation. And then I get told in the end, oh yeah, we've already gone through Russ's office. We have everything taken care of. And I'm like, this looks fabulous. The letter is very clear. It's stated very properly. And then yes, we can go ahead and do 8:30 to 5:30 because that works best for transportation schedules, you know, or Russ, I was even thinking about that extended time that you said, you know, in our office, the employees, we've got to have case notes in by a certain amount of time, right? Like that's really important when they're meeting with students that they get their case notes in so that if I need to read them after hours or something, I can get on there and do that. But sometimes someone may need extended time to do that. And the 24 hours that I require my team to put them in may not be appropriate. And so maybe there's a 48-hour. But I would know that because, oh, okay, if I'm going in to look at this, you know, certain employees' notes, I know, okay, well, they'll be in by tomorrow night, so no big deal. And it's the little things like that that really go the long way for the employee. And I just think that there's, you know, there's nothing more awesome than I can say through the process and how great it is. And the more we do it, like I said, the better it is on that side to really represent the employees and the offices, like you said, all over that represent UF and not just main campus.
Yeah, I think that's really important because we also want employees relying on the law and the entitlement of the law rather than the benevolence of their supervisor in order to access these accommodations, right? Because if their employer changes for any reason, we don't want that to be lost in that process.
Thank you all. I had a question from the audience. I think maybe if we could just spell it out a little more explicitly. The question was, who do I reach out to? What, where? HR, DRC? So if we can just clearly maybe say, go to this page, talk to this person kind of a thing.
Sure. So you go to the Office for ADA Compliance, and that is at ada.ufl.edu. And there's a very navigable, and if it needs to be improved, please tell me, web page with proper forms, proper explanations, and information, and then extended resources as well. The thing to know is you will get reached out to by our case manager or myself to navigate the situation initially, conversationally. Let's just clarify what we're dealing with and how we may be able to help. Kind of getting the lay of the land, the view from 10,000 feet, make nice and comfortable in the conversation. And then we will go down the path of acquiring an accommodation. That would include as Jenna mentioned, the medical documentation, and then the interactive process that also involves their supervisor and anyone else that they would like to have involved or think might be helpful. It is good to know that we do know a lot of folks around campus. And so there are certain departments that like to include HR liaisons in the conversation, and it makes it more comfortable and consistent. That makes total sense to us, and we're happy to do that. We'll broaden the conversation to include more people as long as it helps the situation rather than complicates the situation. I hope that helps.
I'll let you know if anybody asks any other follow-up questions. So just to clarify, and this is related to a question somebody asked, is it required that we are medically diagnosed with a condition to be considered for accommodations? It's not always the case on the student side, whereas in the employee side, is that required?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
The university requires medical documentation, and that can be from any provider. And there's a very broad range of kinds of providers. You know, social workers are providers. counselors, therapists, nurses, physician assistants. It doesn't have to be a medical doctor that's a provider. We're really flexible in that regard, but we do require it. As Jenna mentioned, we do have a close relationship with general counsel, and that is a requirement through the navigation analysis.
Thank you. Another question, we're getting in quite a few on this topic, which, as I'm sure you're guessing, there may be some confusion around these topics, which is why we're having this conversation to begin with. So how does one ask for accommodations yet not disclose their diagnosis or personal challenges? This person in particular is referring to issues with vulnerability with supervisors in sharing. And you already mentioned that that doesn't always have to be part of the conversation, but how does one have that conversation and not talk about it,
Yeah. To be clear, that conversation does not need to happen with a supervisor. That is our role. We engage with the supervisor, and we engage without disclosing any HIPAA protected information. So how that conversation looks in general is that we have a warranted accommodation that we are seeking to provide, warranted due to they've already documented their disability with us, and we are confidential resources in our office. So we won't disclose a person's disability. We're only going to navigate through the interactive process what their needs are related to their essential job functions and what the barriers are that were presented because of the disability. And so nothing is revealed that isn't legally allowed to be revealed. Now, if it is uncomfortable for the employee for us to navigate that, we can talk that through, and we can work on language together. Because keep in mind, our conversation starts with the employee and then goes to the department. So we won't go down a lane with any information they don't want us to go down with. Some things, are unavoidable. It's going to be that the person has to be known as having a disability, because you can't get an accommodation without having a disability. So I can't ask for an accommodation without saying that they have a warranted disability. What that disability is not shared, as I mentioned. But if that's uncomfortable, I understand why it might be, but that's an unavoidable part of the conversation.
And we got a couple more great questions, I think, from the audience. One is it better for an employee to reach out to the ADA office only when accommodations are needed, or can we register with y'all or, communicate with y'all, I guess, even if the current work environment works for us?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Wonderful to be able to navigate situations and talk through even hypotheticals, frankly, of what might be presented down the road. As we all know, things change, and even disabilities adjust and change and are sometimes episodic. And so we would love to be able to begin knowing a person and knowing what might be coming our way to talk it through. No requirement there. And officially, they don't have to register with our office in order to engage in a conversation, but they're welcome to, again, engage in that conversation. And then we can document or not document depending on their desire. We can wait and then have them in our case management system, which is confidential, if they would like to wait, or we can have them in there. And then that way, I call it hit by the bus syndrome. If all of us are hit by a bus and somebody else takes over our role, they're there, and it'll be a smoother transition for the employee, but no have-tos on that.
Thank you. And Jenna, before I move on, I wanted to get your perspective on the student side, because again, this is very relevant for probably many people on this call. What does it look like, kind of the combination of questions that have gone Russ's way from the DRC?
Yeah. First, when it comes to the documented disability, yeah, when it comes to the student side, we're a very different university than most, in the sense that we don't require it to come into the door, right? Like to come into the DRC, we don't require that documentation because we want them to come in and we don't want the office to be the barrier for them. Just because we know there could be financial and cultural barriers, like lots of things wrapped up in 18-year-olds' minds, right? And all the above. So we do allow them to come in and we'll work through temporary accommodations that will expire in like a month or so. That way there's not something that is anything of abusing of a system or anything of that nature. But we will work with them to help them get the documentation because we know that is the end goal, that everybody needs to have that documentation. So we will help them in that aspect of wherever it needs to go. We are very, very honored to have an endowment in the office that pays for evaluations. So a student just has to be registered. So even if you are a staff member and you are taking classes and you think you might have a disability or want to be evaluated, all you have to do is come through our office and our scholarship can pay for that evaluation. So we can do the full evals. It's really great. We have a couple multiple providers that we work with that is fantastic. And again, we can take that financial burden away from the student, which is very powerful. Brina, remind me of the second one that Russ just answered.
A lot of questions have been asked, and I've been deleting them off my screen after I
no.
ask them. So, I mean, generally speaking, the questions that have been asked are, is it better? What's the process? Who do we talk to? Is it better to register without
That's
necessarily
it.
needing an accommodation? That sort of thing, yeah.
That's the one that I forgot. Yes, so I whole am all about it. Like, come to the office, come have the conversation, come get registered, right? Because in accommodations world, in academics, it's not retroactive. So we really want to get you in, really want to get that accommodation plan developed. And then even if you don't use it right away during a semester, you do have it there because you've given it to the faculty. And that's what really helps with that process. So yes, we are all about coming in, even if you're not currently experiencing anything with like one current instructor, coming and having the conversation, getting to know accommodations in higher education is really a really good place to start. So we are all about it. So documentation is, kind of the blur at the beginning, but everybody will have documentation at the end. But then in general, like just wanting accommodations and doing that, yes, come and talk to us as early as possible.
Thank you. So one of the key elements of this presentation today is to dispel some myths, and we've already done some myth busting here today, but I want to maybe hit on some explicit questions regarding myths. One of them being that whether it be retaliation or whatever it might be, there is this common myth that you'll get in trouble if you ask for an accommodation. Can you speak to whether that's true or not? I can guess what the answer is.
We are recording, right?
Yes.
I'm just kidding. It's absolutely true. I mean, I don't think anybody on this call will be surprised by that. There are people who retaliate against change and or differences. And those differences come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. And today we're talking about differences coming through regarding people with disabilities. But that's why we have, a human resources office. That's why we have policy and process, and that's why we have HR liaisons to help in employee relations, who we work very, very closely with. I mean, there are policies against retaliation, and I have been doing this an awful long time, and I realize that oftentimes retaliation comes from sideways behavior and all kinds of different nuances that may not even on its face look like retaliation. But we can unpack that and see what we are dealing with and see what we can do about it. And those are hard conversations to have, but it's a safe place to come to for those hard conversations. And if it feels like retaliation and is looking like it might be, we can engage in that to figure out more deeply what we're dealing with and what we may be able to do to take care of that. It absolutely happens. It happens all the time. It's unfortunate, but that's what we're here to help eliminate.
Yeah, I would say I'm also just gonna go ahead and throw, yep. I mean, truly, I think some of the Office of Civil Rights, the OCR things that Russ and I have to navigate, and I'm so thankful, that he's right there with me every time, is sometimes we just think that, I mean, the students go through it and on the academic side as well. And that is a process that they have a right for. And just as Russ said, like for the employee side too, like if it feels like it usually comes down to when we have that feeling, that conversation, that other steps and other things need to happen. But I do think what is really powerful is that our offices are such a safe space because of the work that we do and the nature of our work. I think that this is a place where even if they don't even know where to navigate it, they would come and, especially on the student side of this just happened and I'm not quite sure what to do. And it's because sometimes at the DRC can make big UF feel like, small and be very homey, and that connection can be there with their specialists. That it is really helpful for that. And so it happens all the time, and it's something that we navigate all the time, and something that I hope that when folks are dealing with it, that they do feel comfortable going to an office or somewhere where they can have that conversation so that we can somewhat handle that myth and those things.
I will say though, it happens all the time, but not most of the time. Most people are supportive and helpful and well-intentioned and do good work around these issues. And so we do have a majority of our employees and their departments doing this well. But it's a big place, and so there are pockets of problems, and we deal with those on the regular.
Yeah, I would say that, when we look at the research in this area, what it tells us is that what the fears are about disclosure for people with disabilities is that they're going to not get hired or lose their job. They're going to lose health insurance, or they're not going to be considered for advancement and things like that. And so, I think we all have to make sure that we are checking our biases, and the way that we can do that often is through educating people about disability, about, the spectrum of disability. And, I often tell people that, if you live long enough, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when that you too will experience disability. And so I think having that knowledge that this is part of the human condition, right? And making sure that everyone understands that and is knowledgeable about disability, the impacts on individuals, and the value, and, part of the differences that we all possess just in being human, and that we need to recognize that everyone can bring value to our workplace.
Thank you. I mean, that is a mic drop sentiment there, but we do have another 15 minutes. So I do want to kind of throw the question more broadly, as you all are professionals in this space, you have seen other potentially, myths or stereotypes or, what have you regarding accommodations, regarding neurodivergent disabilities in the workplace. Are there any other myths or misconceptions associated with this that you would like to dispel at this time?
I think, you know, from my perspective and working with people who are on the autism spectrum is that, you know, sometimes what we hear from people on the spectrum is that people that they work with might have an idea about what is autism because of what we've seen in the media. And we have lots of examples about what autism can look like given the media, but not every example of what autism can look like. And so it is definitely a spectrum. And so sometimes I will have people who will share with me that they disclosed in their workplace, and then someone in their workplace denied to acknowledge their disability because it didn't match their preconceived notion about what that disability should look like. And so I think it's important for all of us to remember that disability is expressed differently in different people, and that we can't bring our own biases to what we think a person with whatever diagnosis, you know, should present like. That we have to, everyone is an individual, we have to learn about everybody and let them tell us about what their disability experience is like from their perspective.
Snaps to that, Anne Marie. I am like over here, yes, yes, and yes, because I think that is what is, it is just so, I think it was actually something, Anne Marie, on your website or on the psychiatry ones. It's a quote that we all say in our staff meetings at the DRC, because it's, I met someone with autism. Okay, great. You met one person with autism, right? Like this idea of, you know, I feel the same way now that I have 2 wheelchair users in the DRC as employees, and completely different needs. And we have open conversations in the DRC staff about this, you know, because again, just because 2 people may have the same diagnoses, completely different accommodations that are needed in place. And something that has very much been a myth busting just within our team and within the DRC team. And it has been really, really phenomenal to see that within all of us. Just kind of, yeah, we think about it all the time, and we treat our students, right? Not one ADHD is the same as another with an ADHD, and we have that conversation. But then when we're actually living it as employees and a team and a culture and a staff, very, very different, right? And I think about our students, we have multiple blind students on this campus, and I can think of one where if you attempted to help them, they would be like, no, thank you, go away, I'm fine. But then every other one would be like, no, yes, please help me cross the street. Like, I would love to have your hand. Thank you so much. Again, just so different, and their needs are just so different. But I think this fear that we all have of disability, because you'll sue me or I'll say something and it will just, you know, make everybody angry. And there's always this negativity around disability. And that is what I always want to try and myth bust, because I am all about speaking about it in a way that it's a learning style, right? Like it's just a different, like we're all different. We all have different brains for a reason, and we're all manufactured that way as human beings. So I try so hard when I'm doing presentations or something that it's just about, it's not always about the diagnosis and that, and we don't have to be so hyper focused on that. It can be about the environment and just how not accessible the environment is, you know, and kind of twist it to that. But I think, yeah, I think the realm at which everybody is just different, the realm in which, you know, all diagnoses and all needs, and it doesn't have to be negative, just ask, right? If I were to ask, if I am just a person who was raised to open the door for someone, then I'll just open the door for someone, you know, like it doesn't have to be a, let me ask and make sure. I might offend, you'll never know if you don't ask. And that is just something that we very much do at the DRC.
And if I could just add, it's shocking in 2024 that many people don't realize that most disabilities are unseen, including neurodivergent issues. And so there's a lot of educating, as Anne-Marie said, that needs to happen, and is a constant and hopeful that it's getting out to the masses, if you will. But we have employees that do all kinds of things for us, from inside work to outside work, and as Jenna said, that environment has such an impact on their particular issue, and so many issues are needing to be navigated with that it kept in mind, because what you think might have worked for one employee would be a very different set of circumstances for the environment that has an effect on another employee. So those are really big issues. The other thing I would say from a myth busting perspective is the misunderstanding of behavior and whether or not there's a problem, if you will, in the behavior that is assumed by people who are the recipient of that behavior. Where I'm going with that is we unfortunately have misunderstandings that people might be unsafe in the way that they are interacting with their fellow students and or employees. And they're not unsafe. They might be behaving differently than other employees, but there's a reason for that. And that reason does not make them unsafe. And so we are always trying to educate and navigate and redirect misunderstandings of behavior, especially around neurodivergent issues, and the fact that that does not make them unsafe and or dangerous to be around. So that's a myth busting constant that we're having to deal with, unfortunately. Even in our professional settings, in our professional schools, same.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have one more question that I'm going to ask that I have prepared, and depending on how long we have before 1 o'clock, which we're running down the clock, I'm going to rapid fire some Q&A questions that came in from the audience. So my final question is, can you discuss any specific strategies or best practices? And these are things that some things have been said already, but I'd love to hear them in this context. Some strategies or best practices for fostering a culture of belonging and support for neurodivergent individuals within the UF organization.
Well, I just mentioned one, but including everyone in that conversation, not just the people who have spoken about their issue and or have come forward to say they don't feel safe, but there's probably many people who could use some educating around how to navigate and interact healthily. And so I would say to bring in everyone in the conversation in the department related to all issues, not just our neurodivergent issues, but all issues related to people with disabilities and how that might look and how that might be seen and how that we might be able to help. As Jenna mentioned, things even down to opening doors for folks or just asking, would you like me to help you, is okay to do, but a lot of people are scared to do it. So I would encourage conversation and training opportunities.
Yeah, I would say, again, the being open and being transparent. I am always very open and transparent, whether it's with students or my employees of, especially financial pieces, things of that nature. I'm just as transparent as I possibly can be so that they know that I'm being my authentic self and not trying to hide something. But also thinking universal design, right? Like that's a really big piece for me. Like when I had my first accommodation need for someone needing a standing desk, I put it on my to-do list that over the next 3 years, I was going to make sure that every employee had that option in the office. And so that nobody would have to ask for it. Right. And so I've just worked on that on a budget, got a little grant, a little assistance, was watching Surplus like a hawk, and like did all that I could to make sure that now everybody has that option. And so that nobody had to even think, oh, I need to go ask for this, oh, I hurt my back this weekend. I need to, I'm trying to take those little things, those little accommodations, and just make them universal for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's really important, acknowledging universal design, right? We see it in curb cuts around campus and things like that, but we also see it in our technology, right? Microsoft Word has a way to tell me when I've made an error in my typing and when I have grammar problems, and the use of AI and all of those things can really help us. They help us all in our our performance. And so I think acknowledging that, because a person, you know, we've said that their disability exists not necessarily in the person. I mean, one perspective of disability is it doesn't necessarily exist in the person, but where the person comes in the interaction with their environment. And so if we think about that and think that, well, the person is coming in contact with an environment, not just at their workstation, but throughout the work setting, right? When they go out into common areas and as they transfer from home to work and all of these places, and being really broad in the way that we think about accommodation, but also in the way that we just build in things naturally so that it's accessible for everybody, I think is really key. And also, like Russ said, increasing our knowledge about disability in general.
Thank you all. Like I said, I'm gonna do a pretty quick rapid fire. We've got about 5 minutes, and we'll see how many of these. We're not gonna get through every question that's come in. Sorry, folks, but we will. I'm just gonna kind of go in order, and whoever can answer, jump in. So, what if a professor is not, and maybe this is for the DRC side, I'm not sure, but what if a professor is not open to accessibility or special accommodation options?
Not an option. I just have to go in there and, you know, be my really laughing awesomeness self, right? That's usually when I have to get involved in the case. And it is, they do push back. They say, no, absolutely not. You know, accommodations are very difficult in foreign languages, right? Let's be honest, because you have to go to class, you have to learn that language, you do have to be there in that moment. So there's a lot of times that I have to work a lot with that department, you know, because it's not that I don't want to, it's Jenna, how is this going to work when the essential function of learning a language is having the communication with somebody else, you know, that type of thing. So it's just getting creative. But yes, people put, you know, they say no all the time. And I don't like the word no. It's just not in the disability vocabulary. So we just kind of focus on the positive and we focus back on the needs. We focus back on the accommodation. What is the accommodation? Let's talk about your class, because here's one thing, I'm not the content expert, right? That is not me and that is not the DRC. That is the faculty, and we want to respect that. And so we are not coming in to overpower, take over. We are just coming in because there is a student who needs this accommodation, and we need to have the conversation about how this will work or will not work. And if it's not going to work, we're going to find something else that is going to work. And so it's a really wrapped around conversation, but that is usually when I have to get involved, is when it is a flat out, nope, not doing it, not having it. And then I'll just go in and have to figure that out.
Thank you. I think, Russ, this is probably more for you. What are options if an accommodation request is denied?
So that speaks to what Jenna was just talking about, and that is figuring out what will work. So the specific request may be denied for reasonability reasons, and that is usually not the case. But if it happens, we have an opportunity to then engage in what might work. What other options could there possibly be? Maybe it's a different work environment. Maybe it's a different set of circumstances around work schedule. For example, if somebody asks to work remotely and that's not going to work for different reasons, you know, well, then what can we do that helps remove the barriers that are in place that isn't just remote work option?
Thank you. I think I have time for maybe 2 more questions. So regarding an employee's official record at UF, what information goes on that record that stays with them throughout their career at UF?
Well, if they mean in the case management system, we document everything. We document when we have phone calls, we document what those phone calls entailed. And when any medical documentation is in the case management system, and any, you know, their accommodation request initially is in there as well. And then any changes along the way are all documented. And that's for good reason, because we need to keep up with how people are doing. As Jenna mentioned, we're talking thousands, and so it has to be somewhere. That somewhere is not accessible to anyone but people in my department. And so there's that to know. No other supervisor and or employee at the university has access to those files. But if there's something that a person doesn't want in their file, they can talk to us and we can talk about why, and then we can talk about what we can put in there and what we won't put in there if they're just adamant about it. The other thing to know is anything that might ever have to go out for any reason, which hardly almost never happens, we can redact anything that is identifying and or a violation of any kind, including a violation of what the employee wants. We can redact, and that we have a whole office within the general counsel's office that does redaction. And so if for whatever reason something's got to go somewhere, we can make sure it goes safely.
Thank you. And the final question for the day, even though we are actually at 1 o'clock, I think this is worth asking. Does anyone on the panel know if the EAP, which I'm putting a link to in the chat, which is the Employee Assistance Program, or any other source at UF or in the region, can help find a place that will help provide a diagnosis or, assess someone for a diagnosis? This person particularly is asking about autism, but, any sort of neurological disorder. Where can somebody go? Because this can be hard to find and expensive.
True. I think it depends on what kind of evaluation are they seeking, right? So you can get a medical evaluation, you can get a neuropsychological evaluation. Both of those things are accessible through the U.S. Department of Psychiatry. There's psychology within that department as well as psychiatry. Also, neurology can make some of those diagnoses. You can also, for autism in particular, we have a Center for Autism and Neurodevelopment, and you can contact that center to request an evaluation, and they can help to navigate that process. And that is for people of all ages.
And I just put the link to that in the chat.
Thank you.
I would say that, again, we're always a place. We work with so many providers locally. So if there's any questions, anybody can always reach out to the DRC. Happy to give the providers that we work with really closely. And again, if you just happen to be taking, even as a non-degree seeking student, if you just happen to be taking a class, we can definitely help with the financial pieces with our scholarship. So please utilize that, because that is something that we are really, really proud of to have. We're the only one in the state of Florida and the SEC that has a scholarship like that. So
that's huge. Russ, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I don't think EAP provides that service. The only thing I'll say on the initial question.
Thank you. Yeah, I was gonna actually say that. But it is an amazing service that you should look into if you do need the assistance. This is just not one of their services, but a provider might have someone that they know that they refer you to, but that's a whole other conversation. Okay, wow. This hour went by so fast. Thank you, Russ. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Jenna, for taking some time out of your busy schedules to talk about this with the university, because it is so very important. And I look forward to having everybody on this call join us at our next session, which is I have to pull it back up, which is going to be July 22nd, and it's going to be about strategies for advocating your needs in the workplace. So whereas today we talked about sort of institutional level accommodations, we're going to be talking about how you as an individual can advocate for yourself in July. So if you have any questions about anything that you heard today, or you want to continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out to me. My department's email address is training@ufl.edu. And with that, I will let you all go, and thank you all for coming. Have a great one.
Everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
thanks, y'all.
Bye, everybody.